Yeah, so this will be the topic for my presentation or my discussion this morning. And basically, those are the areas it's going to cover. I'll talk about the very brief overview of debt crisis in Africa. I know that you are all practitioners that have been working in this area, so I will not go so much into detail with that. I'll talk about the feminist framing around debt. And specifically talk about why debt is a feminist issue, specifically speaking about the gendered implications of debt. And finally, I will start to bring up some questions that we all should debate going forward in this conference around feminist alternatives and how that can be a solution going forward in terms of addressing the debt crisis. And just to say that, in no way that my presentation is going to be exhaustive in terms of all the issues that we should talk about, but it will only be setting the scene and opening up the door for discussions for all the people that are here that have issues to add. So in terms of overview on debt in Africa, the first thing is just to say that it sits in a context where the global economic and financial system is designed, it's not by chance, it is designed to create inequalities between the global north and the global south. And that's something that we're seeing through illicit financial flows and in terms of and conditions of international trade policies, but also all these inequalities, the global system in terms of the global governance architecture that governs global economic policies and financial architecture are designed in a way that is going to keep countries in the global south, specifically Africa, continuing to borrow and have an unsustainable debt. The second point I want to raise is the cost of borrowing. So it's not only that we are borrowing, it's also that the cost of borrowing in Africa is really high, specifically for Africa, and just factually so because of the perception by the global credit rating institutions. So there's a perception that it's risky for African countries to borrow, and as a result, we get high interest rates. But actually, that's just a perception. It's not backed by research, because research shows that actually it's not true that it is the African countries are it is less countries that default on debt compared to other countries in other regions. So we do have a high interest rate and the high cost of borrowing simply because of a perception. And of course, giving an example, the interest rate on debt is at its highest as we speak now, where Africa will pay out $163 billion to service debt in 2024. Which is simply sharply a big increase from $61 in 2010. So of course, with high interest rate comes then with the bigger amount of money that we have to pay. And that means the money that is not going to be used for African development, is money that is not going to be used for climate justice, is money that is not going to be used for protecting human rights and meeting the Africa development goals. But also the terrain has changed in terms of the players when we talk about who is lending. So we have what we call beyond sovereign debt, that we have now different players and they come with different terms and conditions. And so that is extremely important to also bear in mind, whereby bilateral debt now represents 27% versus 52% in 2000, whereas commercial debt accounts for 43% of the total debt up to from 20% in 2000. But also the other thing that, again, I think looks at issues of inequalities, but also the colonial legacy that continues in Africa is around the policy environment. So when we talk about borrowing or debt, it means that we're also accepting that with policy conditions that come with that. And that means that even though we do elect our governments to represent us and take decisions on our behalf, actually those policies are made by other people, other players, specifically IMF and World Bank, and who are actually founded by countries in the global north. and whereby the countries in the global south have limited say in terms of those institutions and how those policies are made. And so the conditions that do come with borrowing means that the policy environment is actually not decided by Africans themselves for Africans. We also know that there is lack of transparency around debt, and therefore it becomes really difficult for monitoring, especially by civil society, in terms of what is happening and holding governments accountable in terms of the borrowing and the governance of debt. And oftentimes you find that then you have what we call like debt that is really not even approved by the parliament. This is, for example, that happened in Mozambique. And if it is not approved by government, definitely there has not been participation of civil society, and barely any participation of the women's rights organizations or feminist individuals, activists, and researchers. So in terms of feminist framing around debt, a few things I want to say. One is that for a very long time, feminist and the reason feminist ideology exists is to really analyze and oppose and dismantle systems of oppression. So as I've discussed on the previous slides, debt is designed in a structural, systematic systems of oppression based on capitalism, on racism, white supremacy, that work together with patriarchy to produce what we have today. And so in terms of feminist framing, feminists have for a long time called for system change to ensure that the systems of oppression in their totality are addressed. I think in the early days of feminism, there was a focus on simply capitalism as a system of oppression that oppressed women. But we have understood, especially as Pan-African feminists, that patriarchy does not work in isolation. Patriarchy works with other systems of oppression, such as capitalism, racism, white supremacy, and others. And therefore, this produces power imbalances between the global north and the global south, but also between individuals within countries, whereby you have, political elites that will benefit from the debt crisis. And I just want to say that the current economic and financial infrastructure is gender exploitative by design. It's not by chance. It's not gender blind. It's not gender blind. It's not like the people who design don't know that actually it does affect women. They design it so that they can benefit from women's labor and continue to make profit. So it's not necessarily that, we don't know, we need to be educated. It's because it is designed to benefit from the women's labor and women's women's skill by paying them extremely little and exploiting them in that way. But also when we talk about the current neoliberalism and the current economic system that we have, there is this division of productive and reproductive activities, whereby the productive activities, are given more value and oftentimes dominated by male, and the reproductive activities are predominantly done by women because of the existing gender inequalities and discrimination, and those are primarily done by women. The current system that we have actually does not even does not recognize. So I was talking about the productive and reproductive activities that is like mainstream economics designs that way. And again, that's also by design to exploit anything that is reproductive and reward anything that is productive. And as a result, the work that is predominantly done by women, which is domestic and unpaid care work, is oftentimes not recognized, it's not accounted for in the economic system in terms of the GDP, and it is not rewarded oftentimes. And so feminists have for a very long time challenged using GDP as a measure of success for our economies. And so I've been doing a lot of reading on this subject, and oftentimes you find, even within this space, we want governments to have increased GDP. And we are talking about COVID as that space where our GDP in Africa went down. But actually we are saying, even when GDP were at its highest in Africa, it was also in tandem with gender inequalities increasing. So it never solved any problem. And so should we recall for things that COVID-19 has affected, even when they didn't work for majority of people? I think that's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Yeah, so therefore, after that framing, I argue that debt crisis is a feminist issue, and I'm going to talk about the gendered implication of that. So first of all, the negative implication of debt conditionalities and repayment, they fuel the existing gender inequalities that we already have. Even though the gender inequalities pre-exist the debt crisis in Africa, when the debt crisis is happening, then the burden of that is borne mainly by women and girls. And when I say women and girls, I'm really mainly talking about like in different intersectionalities that we know. Young women, women that live in rural areas, women working in the informal sector. So it's not also like looking at it as a homogeneous group, but that the different intersectionalities also experience these inequalities and discrimination differently. And research shows that between 2014 and 2018, government expenditures on public services dropped by 15% in sub-Saharan Africa. So as I said, every money, every dollar, because oftentimes it is in foreign currency that we pay debt, not oftentimes, but all the time, it means that it is the dollar that we can't use to actually fund our own development in Africa or fund gender equality objectives or protect the human rights of women and girls. And just an example is that 25 African countries spend more on debt repayment than on education. And 34 African countries spend more on external debt servicing than on healthcare and or education. So the reduction of expenditures in public services and infrastructure has a disproportionate impact on women, who are majority of users of these sectors in terms of, for example, healthcare services. It's women use healthcare because of the reproductive nature of women, but also when families are faced with challenge of who to take to school. When they have boys and girls, oftentimes the choice will be boys, and the girls will stay at home. And there are specific examples. There are research that shows specific examples the way actually this is happening in our countries, and so that's why it is a disproportionate impact on women. But also it means that girls are facing the gender discrimination because of the existing oppressive systems, right from when they are born to when they are working class in terms of productive age, and in terms of when they are older, in terms of whether it is pension or services that care for the elderly. It is like throughout the cycle of women, they are facing the disproportionate impact of debt crisis, but more generally the economic crisis that we have and the system that doesn't work for everyone. Yeah, and the austerity measures definitely is one ways that we have seen in terms of that come with the debt, whereby IMF will put conditions in place. To manage your debt crisis, you need to put these policies in place. And austerity measures mean that there are budget cuts in key areas of education, again, healthy, care services and infrastructure, and all those kind of things. And as a result, women are doing this. Women have to step in to subsidize government services with their free labor. And with economics, there is this assumption that women's labor is elastic, like it is endless. You can stretch it as much as you want, it will always be available. And so when they're cutting budgets, for example, for health sector, they're not thinking about, okay, who's gonna take care of the sick, who's gonna take care of the elderly, because there's an assumption that women are seated at home and they are going to provide that care. And they don't know, they don't care how much time you have to do that. There's an assumption that is elastic and to always be available. That goes also for education. If there's not enough education, we have seen also homeschooling. This happened in COVID, which kind of somehow amplified the gender inequalities. Where with homeschooling, again, it was women who were expected to do homeschooling. So it's very clear who bears, the burden disproportionately of debt crisis and austerity measures that come with it. And also in terms of labor rights, again, in terms of the wage bill, it's one of the austerity measures whereby IMF will come and advise that you need to, reduce the wage bill. It is also, research shows that it's the majority of women that work in public services like education, healthy, care services when they are paid. And oftentimes these are the jobs that are going to go fast. Oftentimes also these are jobs that are not secure and therefore very easy to discontinue those contracts. And we have seen that again, we get a crisis of unemployment, and that mainly faced by women. But also in terms of the regressive tax, also that's something that either comes because governments are under pressure to raise more resources domestically, or they have actually been instructed. It comes as a condition for them to do so. And as a result, we get regressive taxes. I think in Kenya, most recently, we experienced that, whereby, that taxes were imposed on sanitary pads, they were imposed on bread, they were on diapers. And when you have VAT as the increase of VAT, we know that tax is mainly the burden of paying that tax is mainly done by majority of people in the low income category, and it is women that we know that are mostly in the low income categories. And so again, that's something that we are living with, that is very happening, not just in Kenya, but it has happened in Ghana, it has happened in Zambia, it has happened in many other countries that you come from and can share examples. And also that means that, we have also seen like increase of tariffs, increase of taxes on fuel, on electricity, and that increases the cost of living. And again, the cost of living means that it is people in the low paying categories that are going to be affected more. The private partnership model is again a model that has come with the SAPs in the 1980s and 1990s. Again, where we are seeing that the role of government in providing public services is shrinking, and there is encouragement of having private sector as an actor that provides development and provides public services. But we also know that these kind of partnership models come with extractivism of women's bodies, of not respecting human rights, of not respecting the planet that we live on. And so it's a model also that is actually very capitalistic in nature, patriarchal in nature, that is designed to benefit those with capital and not the population providing labor and the consumers. And so finally, I wanted to share some big questions, but also some of the alternatives that feminists have been discussing, and I'm seeing many feminists in the audience that have been part of this discussion in terms of what would feminist alternatives look like. And they're not exhaustive, but I thought I would share just a few, and then we can build on those. One, feminists for a long time, as I said, have called for system change, that it is not about reform, it's about dismantling the existing system that is actually not working for majority of people, and women especially, to building something new, completely new. And that means that, the new system needs to not use GDP as a measure of success. It needs to center human rights. It needs to center the well-being of everyone. And it needs to center social justice and the planet. And so how would that system look like? I think we all need to start imagining what that would look like, And transformation is definitely very hard. And it is easy to think, oh my God, where do we start from? But we must start from somewhere. And it is us, it's us that have to start that discussion. The second point is social organization of care work. Again, like I said, this is an important aspect. It cannot be seen as a sideline thing, because this assumption that, you know, let's value productive activities and forget about reproductive activities is definitely not going to take us anywhere, because we know that without care work, without reproductive social organization of care work, the reproductive activities cannot happen. In the first place, we know that it is reproductive care work that produces future labor. So which people are going to be employed and exploited if labor is not being produced? But also we know that to be productive outside, we must be cared for, we must be nurtured, we must eat food, that food must be cooked, we must be in a clean environment. And so that separation and undermining and undervaluing of care work must stop if we are talking about transformation. And I realized I'm not very good with this slide. Yeah, but I'm on the second point really around care and how that must be at the center of redesigning and rebuilding a new economic system. But also the decolonization approach. I think some of the points I raised on the first slide around inequalities that African countries are facing, whether it is in terms of paying the highest interest rates based on assumptions, that is also something that, if we are talking about transformation, we must definitely look at it from a decolonization approach, because we know that it is the colonizers that have set this system to exploit the formerly colonized, who are still facing the impact of colonialism up to date, that are still, we are still operating in, you know, impacted by imperialism. And therefore, how do we make sure that we are taking a decolonization approach whereby actually African governments and countries and people have independence over their own development, over their own policies, over their own environment, and how policies are put in place and practices. There has been a call for debt cancellation by feminists, and this to be actually taken as reparation, so that it is not that, you know, there is like doing a favor, but reparation, because we are in this time because of impact of colonization, because of the impact of slave trade, because of these continuous policies that are being put in place by colonizers, that we do need to, you know, so I think there's a role for looking at it as reparation, for stopping international aid and actually get financial contribution as in forms of reparation that is, you know, is not given with conditionalities, you know, whereby there is, you know, that comes with enforced policy that you must follow. But can it be open financial contribution as reparation? And it is the continent that decides how those resources are used. But also the role of the state is something that is extremely important. We have seen that, you know, increasingly the role of the state is being diminished in terms of looking at the role of the state as, you know, simply to provide a conducive environment for everyone to operate. But the state has a role to raise maximum available resources to meet the development needs, to protect human rights of its citizens, and to address gender inequalities and other inequalities. And therefore, I think any transformation is to think about the role of the state, to be a provider of services, to raise maximum available resources in ways that is not exploitative, that provides justice and equality, and to actually protect the planet, because we all need it. And finally, I wanted to raise the issue of the meaningful participation and how that look like, just because it has also been kind of co-opted or misused, you know, whereby, yeah, everyone will be like, I'm consulting. World Bank and IMF will say we are consulting. Governments will say we are consulting. So what does that mean in terms of also building governance systems, even in our own countries, that is informed by the voice of the people? Because we know that even with acquiring debt, oftentimes people are not involved. The voices of people are not seen. And And people are told later on when they are facing all these difficulties, and that's something we saw recently in the protest in Kenya, where government was like, oh, we are happy that young people are talking about IMF and World Bank. You see, that's where the problem is coming from. But no, we also elected you to manage those problems. You also have a responsibility as a national government. So what are you doing, and how are you engaging with citizens? How are you making sure that different arms of government, parliament, you know, the judicial, are involved in making sure that there is a proper governance system in terms of how we acquire loans, in terms of how we build our systems, in terms of how we also use the acquired loans. Because just because we have acquired big debts, it does not necessarily mean that that debt has been used to better the lives of people. And that's something that feminists have also been talking about, in terms of we are not consulted when the debt is being secured, but also we don't know how the debt is being used, and definitely is not used in ways that is protecting our human rights, is advancing gender equality. And so the governance question at the country level must be also discussed in tandem with discussing the transformation of the global economic and the financial system. Thank you very much.